So nobody is noticing this about how Trayce Jackson-Davis got on the Warriors originally, and I want to shout out a comment that I got on a recent video regarding this, because I had made a video about the Chris Paul trade, and somebody pointed out that, look, like, Trayce Jackson-Davis was actually technically traded to the Warriors. So I kind of have a screenshot here up on the screen, but essentially when that Chris Paul trade happened, the Wizards also traded one of their second round picks to the Warriors, and that pick was the 57th pick, and ultimately the Warriors used that pick to draft Trayce Jackson-Davis. So technically speaking, as the title of this video says, the Warriors should have never been allowed to trade for Trayce Jackson-Davis. So that's kind of an interesting thing there. I'd actually totally forgotten about that. So thank you to the person who actually pointed that out on one of my recent videos. I really appreciate that. And now I'm making a video about it. So that's kind of been an interesting wrinkle in this whole Chris Paul trade that I think nobody really realized. And I didn't realize it when I made that Chris Paul trade video, right? So that's pretty cool to think about, that, you know, the Warriors technically traded for Trayce Jackson-Davis. Like, realistically speaking, or I guess technically speaking, if the Wizards never gave the Warriors that second round pick, Trayce Jackson-Davis wouldn't even have been on the Warriors. So that's kind of a crazy thing to think about. But yeah, Trayce Jackson-Davis, I mean, I can't say enough about him. I obviously talked about him in my last video and how good, you know, he's been, especially with Clay, with obviously his pick and roll chemistry with him, and then, you know, with Draymond in the front court, he's been excellent in the starting lineup. Now, the thing to point out is that, look, will he still be starting when Kuminga comes back? You know, it's hard to say. I think he probably will still be starting, right? Steve Kerr has really found a starting lineup that has worked, and it seems like he's found certain starting lineups that have worked throughout the season. But at the same time, at this point in the season, the Warriors are on a roll. We're getting towards the play-in. You don't really want to break that, you know, lineup up, right? You're going to want to keep the guys together that are playing well, especially in that starting lineup. But Trayce Jackson-Davis, he's gotten so much better throughout the season. You know, he kind of got little spot minutes here and there. He wasn't really expected to be in the rotation. But it was pretty clear right away that he brought something completely different to the Warriors center position that they have been sorely lacking. And that is a lob threat, and that is also a threat to block shots, right? Like, the Warriors just haven't had that type of center. And, you know, that's not to, you know, throw shade at like Kevon Looney or Dario Saric or, you know, Nemanja Bjelica. Like, obviously they're really good players, but their skill set is more of like, you know, a stretch big type role. And with Looney, right, he's not really the highest, you know, vertical jumping player, I guess you could say, right? Like, he's more of like, I'm going to play smart, I'm a high IQ guy, I'm a rebounder, I'm a solid defender all around. And that's not a bad thing, right? Like, obviously the Warriors have needed Looney. They would not be where they're at without Kevon Looney. I mean, Looney had like a 23 rebound game in the playoffs last year. He averaged, his stats were absolutely ridiculous in last year's playoffs. So I'm not going to discredit Looney with any of that. But Trayce Jackson-Davis just brings a different skill set to this team. And we've all known that the Warriors have needed this type of big man all along. And now that they have a young big man like Trayce, who's been in that starting lineup and contributing the way he has, you're seeing what this Warriors team looks like at full strength. And of course, we wish Trayce would have been in the starting lineup the full season. And of course, we know that if probably Trayce would have been in the starting lineup the full season, and if the Warriors were playing as well as they are right now, they would probably be towards the top of the Western Conference. But unfortunately, that's not how things have played out. And a lot of that was due to their, I believe it was like a 19-24 or 19-25 start to the season, which hasn't been that good. But pretty much since then, they've been around, I believe, 23-9, at least at the recording of this video. And that is absolutely huge. For a team to be playing this well down the stretch, you just never know. You know, if you get on a roll, you can make a deep playoff run, especially in what is a stacked Western Conference. It's kind of wide open. I mean, I would say, though, the Nuggets are still the favorites to get out of the West. But for the most part, it's wide open. And I think all these teams, you know, like the Lakers, the Warriors, the Kings, they want to make a similar run to what the Miami Heat did. But also at the same time, you got to understand how rare that is. But I'm getting a little bit off track right now. Let's get back to Trayce Jackson-Davis. So, you know, like I said, his ability to catch lobs has been so big for this team. And it seems that Trayce, he always finds the open space. He always finds a way to get open for the lob. But at the same time, it makes sense, right? Like, if you have that little inch of space and that you were able to create, and you know, had a hard roll to the basket, and you're running the floor well, you're playing with the two greatest point guards of all time, right? Like, Steph and CP3 are going to find Trayce. And I think that's something that was a little bit lacking from James Wiseman's game. He just didn't really get open a lot on the pick and rolls. I don't think he rolled hard enough at times, and he just didn't seem to get as open. But with Trayce, he's getting open a lot more, and he seems to just have a knack for the basketball, and his IQ is really spot on too. I mean, you're seeing him now start to make passes out of the pick and roll where if he catches the ball, right, he's immediately looking to pass. There's been times where he's found, you know, Gary Payton under the basket, he's found Clay for a three, right? Like, he's understand how to play in that Warriors system, I think, a lot faster than most, you know, young centers have for this Warriors team over the years, and that's big. Now, obviously, Trayce was a 4-year college player. You know, he was a star at Indiana. You knew he was going to come into the NBA as a high IQ player, but still, nobody expected him to play the role that he has this year, because you got to keep in mind, he was the 57th pick in the draft. Normally, 57 picks, like, they're not really starting in their rookie season. Like, that just doesn't happen that often, and so he was a steal of the draft. I don't even know if that's a debate anymore at this point. Like, Trayce Jackson-Davis was easily the steal of the 2023 draft. For the Warriors to get a high-value pick like Trayce with the 57th pick, which was the second to last pick in this draft, because there were a few picks that were, you know, foregoed and eliminated. I'm not going to get into that right now, but basically the NBA penalized a few teams for some tampering. But either way, Trayce Jackson-Davis was the second to last pick in the 2023 draft. So for him to contribute as much as he has, it says a lot. But not only it says a lot about him, but it says a lot about the Warriors scouting department and the decisions that Mike Dunleavy has made so far. I mean, for Podziemski and Trayce Jackson-Davis to be, you know, Mike Dunleavy's first 2 draft picks, like, that's excellent. I mean, you are starting off on, you know, an absolutely great trajectory as a GM, right? So props to Mike Dunleavy. And I think from what, you know, we kind of heard Mike Dunleavy say over the summer, like, they already wanted Trayce. Like, they knew if Trayce was on the board, they were going to select him. Like, he was basically their guy, right, after Podziemski in a sense, right? Like, if Podziemski was taken, maybe they're going to find a way to get Trayce and, you know, vice versa, right? But they didn't expect Trayce Jackson-Davis to fall that far. So when they had an opportunity, you know, to get a pick from the Wizards, they were able to, in a sense, quote-unquote, trade for Trayce Jackson-Davis. So this whole thing was perfect, and the Warriors should have never been allowed to trade for Trayce Jackson-Davis, right? At this point, it's unfair. You got your center of the future, and this is exactly what the Warriors have been looking for. A young center who's a lob threat, can block shots, can run the pick and roll with, you know, Steph, Draymond, and CP3, and a guy that can be relied on long term to not only anchor this Warriors defense, but really, in a sense, be the connector on offense because of what Trayce Jackson-Davis cannot only do on the defensive end, right? But like I said, he's become a great passer out of the pick and roll as well, and he showed a little bit of that in college. So that's what I want to talk about with Trayce Jackson-Davis. Man, he's just been awesome this season. There's not much else I can say about him. I feel like I've just talked about the Warriors young core so much this year, but they've been such a bright spot for this team. So I'm looking forward to the playoffs here in the play-in. We will see what happens, but Trayce Jackson-Davis will for sure have a major role with this team. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace out.